good. So that's the Simon model, and then stepping a little further into other kinds of rich get richer phenomena. But now we're going to step into this other enjoyable piece from our friend Mandelbrot, where he has a different approach to Simon, and they get upset about it all. And because in the 1950s, no one's tweeting at each other, right? So there's no rage tweeting by academics, which is pretty fun to watch. Sad, very sad, but it happens. All right, so it's going to be this. We're going to have a minimal cost idea. So it's a very reasonable idea that you don't want language to be an expensive thing to produce, right? And to either as the sender or the receiver, you don't want it to be too burdensome. You want it to fit. Ultimately, it has to fit knowledge well, which is a huge, interesting problem. So, and then we'll have this little debate, and then we'll go through the model and then talk about some of the actual data that people have looked at. People are very resistant to looking at data. Does this work? Oh, that's nice. I made a bunch of these. It's obviously. Okay, great. Really important addition. So the dream of efficient language. That's our tarot card for this one. So these dominant words, these big words, the and so on, right? The idea that we would have a skewed distribution and would have this form. It's not just that there are rare words and common words. That there's really this very, very clean mathematical form for that. Okay, Mandelbrot, very famous for fractals, coined the term. Other people had thought about various things, but really coined it. Did a lot of stuff with finance as well, fractal structures there. But the Geometry of Nature was his famous book. Pretty argumentative kind of character. He would get into tete-a-tetes with people, as we'll see. He would like to say this. This is his name, is almond bread. Anyway, so people love this. Pure mathematicians will put it on their door. But it is sort of a gimmick of sorts. But the thing is he was right. I mean, the fractal structures are everywhere. Right? Okay. Yeah, and the joke is Benoit B. Mandelbrot. The B stands for Benoit B. Mandelbrot. So Zipf's law through optimization. Math jokes are the best. Well, yeah. Okay, language is efficient, right? So that's fair enough, not bad, all right? And we're going to communicate as much information as possible with as little cost. So we're going to have to measure information content, not meaning, which is probably what we want to measure, but we have this sort of funny word for information. So it's going to be Shannon's entropy. Better to say entropy than information, but we often do this. Information connotes meaning, it's not meaning, it's entropy. It's a measure of disorder. And average cost. And then you could play around with this in different ways, but this is his setup, and we're going to follow it. Language evolves to maximize we could do H minus C or something, but they don't have the right units, so you maybe set up like this. Or minimize cost divided by information, or whatever we want to do. There you go, that sort of thing, right? So we should get similar things out. And so, of course, optimization, right, pops up. And we'll see that appearing for highly optimized tolerance. It's in the frame of the name there. Of course, the acronym there is HOT, so that was well done. We'll see there's also COLD, right? There's a COLD model. Academics at their best. All right, so, but HOT is really good, I like that. Okay, so I have to do this sort of thing. So I'm sure none of you have ever seen this, but Highlander, has anyone ever seen Highlander? Yeah, pretty bad, right? But also awesome. So, it's one of those tricky films. There can be only one. So, yeah, it has a Frenchman playing a Highlander, right? A Scottish Highlander, right? And then Connery, who's Scottish, playing a Spaniard. It's just a disaster. Yeah. Anyway. Really awesome. Somehow it's about immortality. So there should only be one theory of ultimately for things. Also Highlander films, very badly. They made 2 more. Probably the worst retcon you've ever seen. So worth finding out about. Another great thing about Highlander, endless numbers of great things, is that Queen, one of Queen's albums is basically the soundtrack for this film. It's a kind of magic, which is just glorious, Freddie Mercury. I'm not going to make you do this because that would really hurt. But okay. So there's some of the lyrics from Queen at the top, just so you know. So these are people, Mandelbrot and Simon. So Mandelbrot produces the work we'll look at now in 1953, and as I think I said, it was a chapter in a book on communication. Simon's paper comes out, and it's got this terrible title. It comes out a couple of years later, but obviously people start connecting them. So this is a different time scale, right? Not the tweet time scale. So this is Mandelbrot, a note on a class of skew distribution functions, right? So he's going to go with that. Analysis and critique of a paper by that guy, right? So he's like, he's going to call him out, right? He's calling him out. He's saying his name, which is very Mandelbrotian. Simon comes back with some further notes on a class of skew distribution functions, trying to give it the, like stepping. Yeah, I mean the words are in there, but he's not at least saying Mandelbrot in the title. Final note. This is 61 on a class of skew distribution functions. Analysis and critique. What I said. No, your paper is stupid. Reply to final note by that guy. This is 61. And then postscriptum to final note. This is just a rampage of madness. And there was one more. So reply to Dr. Mandelbrot's postscriptum. It's pretty enjoyable to read these things. They've got this sort of stuff. We shall restate in detail our objection. And people love to do this. You'll see, everyone's name get attached to the zip thing. Our objections are quite valid. And there's right? It's talking about signs and these sorts of things. He's proposed a new set of objections, like his earlier ones. These are invalid, right? Fake science, yeah. Okay, and then we have this sort of thing, right? Okay, that's sitting around from an old time. I am immortal, I have inside me blood of kings. Really great songs. Okay, so this I'm not going to show you, but this is ridiculous. But this is Mad Max 3 Thunderdome. Okay, so filmed in Australia. Well done. Okay, so let's work through Mandelbrot. So that's pretty amusing, and I guess now it would have been a different, we would have blog posts in the aughts or something, and now it would have been this frenzy of tweets with billions of people piling on and saying, splintering, and then Twitter trying to organize it. Oh my God. Anyway, okay. So we really care about the theories in the end, right? The people are fun on top, fun little surface pieces. So we're going to imagine we have a language with n words, which is it's going to be a lot of things that you'll see are pretty. Simon's model is very simple. This is also a highly simplified version of language. So, and it's going to be, this is the straight up zip distribution idea, right? There's going to be I words, and we'll have them ranked in terms of probability. And then this is exactly how really entropy works, Shannon's entropy works. We assume random production of words. It's obviously not true. Obviously it matters to us, composition of letters matters, but it matters in this model in an interesting way. It has to be an alphabet-based language that works for this thing. So this is stepping away from cities and all those other things that Simon was trying to kind of connect in as well. This is very language specific. So we're going to assume we have M letters, and then words are going to be ordered by shortest to longest, and the most probable one will be the shortest. And so you can look at this too, right? As short words, more frequently occurring and so on. So there's been lots of arguments about that, which was maybe surprising. Word cost, so we're going to have length of word plus a space. It's just going to be straight up length of word. Obviously it didn't matter for Simon's model. Real words don't use these all letter sequences, which is what will be allowed here, right? So for 2-letter words in English, it'll be 26 times 26, which is not really true, right? So for Scrabble, it's about 100 words. I mentioned Scrabble the other day. I think there are, depending on the dictionary you use, at some point, there was one dictionary that I remember, there was 98 valid 2-letter words. Okay. C and Q being an ox and X, really making the X just great. Okay. Vietnamese monetary units, very useful. Right, so they don't use all letter sequences, that's fine, right? So maybe real words basically follow this, right? So that shorter words are more common, yes, yes, yes. And there's some subset, you know, maybe it's just sort of a ratio that we have to put in there. Words can be encoded in this way as well, that's possible, right? So we're not actually talking about the words, we're just talking about their encoding. And then, you know, just yelling at each other. So, various objections. All right, this is just a kind of a gentle introduction, hopefully, to entropy, right? So, these are going to be the words. They're very odd words. So there's going to be encoded. We'll just have a binary story for our words. Our alphabet is binary. And then we have to have some space character as well. But for the words, it's going to be like this. So here's our most common word. So this could be the and of and. They're encoded in this way. And it's just a binary. We're just counting out in binary. Yep. And then the length of these, right? So this is length 1, this is length 2, length 2, length 3, and so on. It grows. And it grows logarithmically. This is log 2 of I. It grows slowly. So it's 1 plus log 2 of I. So this is a very rough, this is not a bad approximation for length. Obviously it's wrong when it's not a pure power of 2, right? So it works when it's 2 to the 3 here and so on, right? So this is the idea that this will be the cost. So the cost is going to grow. So we're going to have these, we're indexing our words, and the ith word will have this cost. And we could get rid of the 1 as well. Right, so the 2kth word is going to have this length of k plus 1. So 2 to the power of 3 has length 3 plus 1. Right, 2 to the power of 2 has length 2 plus 1. And so that's true for all of them, as I said, and then we'll just interpolate and say this is roughly true. If we have m letters, then we're going to have a log m for this as well. Fine. All right, so this is a, you know, not a bad thing, right? It's actual, like, if you're typing this thing out, this is the cost, right? How many keystrokes to send this message. It's not clear how that works when you speak it, but this is not that bad. All right, so the model is going to be this. We've got a cost of the ith word. As I said, it's going to grow logarithmically. This means it grows slowly with its index. And if we add the space, right, each word's going to be followed by a space or maybe a period, but let's basically say that. So this will be the proper cost, but we don't have to worry about, you know, any offset. They've all got that, and we can do this. And we can also multiply by a ratio. This, if it's log-based m, we can also, you know, rearrange it. You don't have to worry about this too much, but if you divide log e by the log e m piece, we get back to here. So this is just some general factor. So we could turn it into so we can say, okay, it's proportional to natural log. A natural log allows us to differentiate in simple ways. So that's good. So the total cost of this language, if we're randomly saying these things or we have these weights for them, this is the probability that the ith word gets used, then it's times its cost. And so we're just going to sum up this whole thing here, right? This is per word. So sort of an average thing that's happening. Okay? Ultimately, you're trying to find p sub I. What's the probability of the ith word? Okay, so that's just cost. And at the same time, we need a measure of information. So we're going to use, sorry, the first thing I showed you wasn't information, it was of course cost. Shannon's entropy. All right, so this is, and I'll talk, this is where I have a gentle introduction to entropy. This is the framing for it. It's all usually written like this. It's not, there's some aspects of that which aren't great. I mean, it would be nice actually if this was 1 over pi in here, because that's really what it is, right? So it's a weighting of log base 2 of 1 over pi, which we'll talk about in a second. Von Neumann apparently told Shannon to call it entropy because no one understands that, and that would be better, right? That's like, this is a messy thing, and if you call it information, people will get the wrong idea about it. And in fact, in Shannon's original paper, I think in the second paragraph, he says, this is not about meaning. So, but information feels like, you know, it connotes meaning, in a meta kind of way. All right, so, what this is the average number of bits to encode each word, because this 1 over p sub I, this log of 1 over p sub I, sometimes called the surprisal, is a measure of the average number of bits you would require to encode it, given that it occurs with this probability, right? So a word that appears half the time, you're going to assign you're going to say that's a 1, right? And everything else starts with a 0, because you want to distinguish that straight away, right? If half of your words are exactly the same, you want to use you want to use the minimal unit you can for that, and you would signify the start of your word would be a 1, and then anyone decoding it would know this is that word straight away, and they don't have to carry on. Right, so this is the saying what that is, and I have a few pieces on it, right? So, right, if it's a half, we need only 1 bit, right? So log of 1 over a half is 1, log base 2. If we had 1 over 64, so 1 in 64 words are this word, then we need, so this is 2 to the power of 6 on the bottom, so we need 6 bits for that. Right? You imagine it saying it's not this word, it's not this kind of word, it's not this group of words, or this group of words, it's this one. So you need this little tree that you're making of words. You'd need 6 branches for that. I guess 5 branches. All right. We can make a simpler thing here too. We can we can make it log e as well. Same kind of game there, so that we can differentiate. Again, it's proportional, so it's going to be, we'll put some constant, right? Minus g. Fine. But we've gone, before we had pi log of I plus 1 in here, and this is log e of pi. That's the big difference between those two. Okay, I know I'm going. So this is just a straight, normal Shannon entropy measure. We'll change it into a log base e thing. So we're going to minimize this function. We've got these n variables in it. We're going to call it the cost divided by the entropy. Well, yeah, we want to minimize that. Could be maximizing the opposite thing. So we're going to do this. And we have a constraint, right? That these probabilities have to sum to 1. They have to all be greater than or equal to 0. That's true too. And so the tension is clear, right? We have shorter words are cheaper, right? They cost less to say. Long words have more information, right? So we want to, there's a preference on top for the cheaper, shorter ones. There's a preference on the bottom here for longer words, because they'll damp this down. So that feels like it should have some kind of shape like this, right? They could all be really cheap, but that's not going to work out. All right, so you're going to make a Lagrange multiplier story. I probably should have asked you that. If you haven't seen Lagrange multipliers, it's okay. It is really, something you can work through. It's just a differentiation problem with many variables. Again, you don't have to have taken vector calculus or anything to get this out, but this will look pretty out of control, I suppose. Here's the function we're trying to minimize, and with Lagrange multipliers, you add the constraint function with a lambda, because what you're trying to do is I guess I can, of course I can do it on this. Yeah. So you're going to say, here's some constraint, right? So my variables your function has to list, you have to be somewhere on this path. And then there's some function of this space, right? So this is some space. There's some function on this space. You imagine like contours on this, of this function, right? So f increases this way, some function of, and it could be just terrain, right? So imagine this is a path around a mountain, and or on part of the landscape, and then this is some of the terrain. And you want to figure out, and the mountain's going up this way, right? So you're allowed to be on this path, and you want to find the maximum of this function such that you're on that path. So as you walk around on this path, there are these places, special places you get to like this, right here, and will be here, I guess, where the line of steepest descent and the normal to your path match up, right? They're pointing in the same direction. Doesn't matter what the length are, but they're just pointing in the same direction. And they're pointing in the same direction here. So here your normal is pointing out in this direction. Let's do this. Put one here. Right, they're not matching up. Right, if you were standing there, you're on your path, you turn 90 degrees, so you look across your path, and then look the steepest descent, it would be, not in the same direction. But you get to here, and that's straight up. So the idea is, it's kind of a funny looking contraption, but what you say is, okay, well, let's take this function, right, that this is the height of the landscape, and this is the constraint of where the path is, and we want those things to point in the same direction. And that will happen if we minimize all of this and then set it equal to 0, because we're going to say the normal to this thing and the gradient of this thing are, right, there's a 0 here, so that they have to be proportional to each other, and we don't care what that lambda is. Okay, that's you can look at it some more if you haven't seen it, but that's the basic idea. Or you can just do it, right? So here's our function. Put it all together, right? This is c divided by h. Sometimes you want to call it c and h, but that's the setup. And we have this constraint that the sum, I know that's a funny looking thing, but the sum of the pi minus 1, which equals 0. You always write constraints. You don't have to, but you write constraints as something equals 0. So you take this, work through it, some minor suffering, and you get out this result, right? So that the probability of the jth word decays as j, it's a j plus 1, but basically j to some power. So this is it, right? It doesn't come out of some other distribution or whatever. It comes out as a power law, decay. This is exactly the Zipf distribution. Power law. So you don't have to. The slides are clapping. And then you do some sneakiness to get lambda out in terms of these things, and you figure out that this is equal to, whoops. Yeah, this is a proportional to, you actually figure out it's exactly this form, right? Right, this is an equal sign now. So it starts off at, for 1, it starts off at 2, 3, 4, right? So the internal piece here. And then this is some power. It depends on the information, the cost, this constant g. And we don't have to determine them exactly. We just need to, this is where we use our constraint. We know that the sum of these probabilities has to be 1, right? So the sum of these, we can just sum over this, right? How do we want to do that numerically? We can do that. So this has to be true. So I'm just putting this stuff back in. So this is our constraint. Sum of probabilities has to be 1. We notice they're all greater than 0, which is good. So we're going to sum over this thing. And we'll just say that's alpha. That's our exponent alpha for Zipf's law. If you want, and you let n go to infinity, and you don't have to worry about this, then this is really the zeta function. Mathematicians love this thing. So it's a zeta function, but it really starts at 2 because j equals 1. This is 2, 3, 4. And that's something that's sitting in, lots of things. Lots of systems that you might use. And it's fun to draw zeta as well. But you don't have to worry about it. At this point, if you say, there are 10,000 words, you can just sum this up and say, which alpha gives me 1. If you let n go to infinity, then you roughly get alpha is 1.73. And this is gives you gamma, right, 1 plus 1 over alpha. That's right, yep. If we flip back to the power law size distribution, and that exponent is too wide, right? It's more, we think, for Zipf's law, you often see closer to 1, which would be closer to 2 here, right? They're the two ways of looking at this, right? So Zipf's law should be closer to 1, some variation, and then gamma is going to be closer to 2. So it doesn't quite come out right. And that's Mandelbrot's story. You can play around with this. You can say, well, the cost function we just made up, we can add an a to it. So that's a little game to play and see if you can mess around and tune this exponent some way. All right. Okay. So in summary, it doesn't give you quite what we got, with Simon's model. Simon's model had this nice thing where we have this measurable innovation rate. And for small innovation rate, you get something that looks like you get an exponent, Zipf's exponent of 1, which is a gamma of 2 for the size distribution. And that matches up pretty well with reality, right? So that was the powerful thing there. Of course, optimization is all over the place, right? It's happening in all sorts of systems. If you think about what's going on in evolutionary systems, lots of things. And there's lots of incommensurate pieces trying to be optimized. So that's a really, it's not a simple thing. People change language because it's fun. They make cryptolex, so no one can understand them, right? Yeah. They make up new words. So that's fine, but there's still optimization to some extent, as we've seen with, say, the way verbs have become more regularized. So it's not super convincing, and it depends a little too much on the definition of cost, and here's the micro problem with this. We can't go in and say, this is really what a word costs, right? Like, if you have like fluid mechanics and you have a parameter in your equations, which is viscosity, you can go and measure it. Innovation rate, you can go and measure it, right? That's what you want to be able to do. Temperature matters in your thing. You want to be able to measure that independently and then stick it in your equations. Okay, so this is just just quickly to say, this is the end of Mandelbrot's paper. There was a little discussion, and I just want to point out this thing. Mandelbrot, says this thing. So this is something axiomatic that will all right, so there's no evidence of any direction of evolution in language, right? It's pretty interesting. Axiomatic which is a strong thing to say, that it will remain so. So I don't believe there's any evolution, and as a scientist, I don't believe there will be. Usually when famous scientists say something won't happen, it will. And if they say it will happen, it will. So it's an interesting problem. Anyway, Mandelbrot wasn't quite as rude as he was to Simon here in his response, and you don't have to worry about this too much. But this is this view that language develops in essentially a purely random manner. I mean, that's just bananas, right? Anyway. I don't know how that goes. All right, so let's look at this. So there are a couple others. We're going to come to this hot optimization and randomness. There's a nice mixture of those things. This work by Ferrer Contra. This is Soleil, so they have some nice stuff there. Raisa de Souza had some stuff on scale for networks, which did this. So it's going to be a mixture of these growth and then attempts to optimize as well. That's fine. Okay. I'm going to run out of time. But let me tell you a few other pieces here. So this is Miller. Miller is a famous character in a number of ways. Miller, I think, is behind we can only remember 7 digits. That sort of, it's like drink 8 glasses of water a day. These are not well-founded things. Miller is the one who came with the argument of monkeys producing Zipf's law. Said this is all just like this would just happen. This just happens for free, right? So Miller's a sort of an odd character. He's in the introduction of Zipf's reprinting of Zipf's. Zipf had a book called Psychobiology of Language in the 30s, actually. So he has things like, Miller mentions genes of language, which is really interesting because this is Richard Dawkins later on comes up with memes, right? In The Selfish Gene. In that book, he comes up with this idea of, he says, let's call them memes, little copyable things, and they're the elements of culture and sort of like genes. And that went all over the place, right? The science of memetics. There was the people who kind of went wholesale into that it's just like evolution and we should, they're exactly the same. But, all right, I mean, of course, memes now are just little GIFs and stuff. Aha, GIFs. That's what most people think of as memes, but this idea that they're cultural units. Anyway, this genes of language was a little framing there. This is, again, 60s. So, still fighting about this. This is a 2010 paper. Random text did not exhibit the real Zipf's like. This is saying it's not monkeys. Stop it. This is, from 50 years of people saying, you'll get people occasionally say, oh, that's just randomness. It's not true. This is from the introduction. So it's not calculated to please every taste. Zipf was the kind of man who would take roses apart to count their petals. If it violates your sense of values to tabulate the different words in a Shakespearean sonnet, this is not a book for you. So statistical analysis, right? So, and then he's getting a little rude about it. However, for those of you who do not flinch to see beauty murdered in a good cause. And he goes on to say it's all wrong, right? But I think he thinks it's kind of all wrong. What does he say about this? Who would have thought? Very hard of all the freedom languages laws, Zipf would find it invariant. He likes the gravitation thing. All right, he's happy with that. But he still thought Zipf's law was not a thing, that was just for free. So if you look through, he says, basically, I don't have to read this, but, monkeys would produce this, and he says, Mandelbrot got it right, So Zipf was wrong, right? I'm reintroducing this book, and I'm just going to tell you it's wrong. And he's a murderer of words and books. He would have a heart attack with Google scanning books, I have to say, right? Just cut off the edge. Okay. Anyway, but this is still, it's inspirational, even if Miller is, a little crazy. So let me just show you, I'll finish with the last few pieces. So this is Bornholm and Evil. This comes in 2001, and it follows on from Barbazi and Albert, which we'll get to later on for networks. Shows Simon's model did very well for the growth of the World Wide Web, as it was always called. This is probably a new flavor appears, and of course this is probably the new web page appears. This is based on one of these ridiculous websites that I told you about, Alta Vista, which was a search one. So there's a point one of a new page popping up, and all these pages have links, right? So it's a really nice thing to look at. And the in-link distribution, if you take that row, right, this is this thing we derived earlier, so it's 1 plus 1 over 1 minus rho, so it's roughly 2.1. And that matched up very well with reality, right, which is this exponent. It's a nice power law exponent, 2.1 plus or minus 0.1. And the paper from Barbazi and Albert was published in Science in 1999, had a model that was not as elaborate as Simon's, and it produced just one exponent of -3. There was no variability in it, just with an exponent of -3. So, which is a really long way away from this, right? It's, in terms of, it found a power law, and that was enough for it to be said to be a powerful result, a good result. But the truth is, of course, you have to get the exponent right. So this was, this is a pretty, this is a big deal, I think. I don't think it got quite the excitement that it should have. This is from, this is a more detailed thing looking at the actual evolution of, in this case, Linux distributions. So very nicely done, right? So they're named after characters from Toy Story, so Woody and Sarge and Lenny, and so that's kind of nice. Which sort of softens the blow of Linus Torvalds turning out to be a terrible human being. Okay, so this is 2008, it's DDA Sornet's group at Zurich. So what they're showing is this is right, incoming links to a package, right? So how many, you've got this package, you can imagine this is true in software all over the place. You've got some code that points to other code, lots of things to count up. So it has one of these nice zippy sort of things. And they, so this is the tricky part, right? So you've got, this is how many links you have coming in. This is the change you expect as you go from, or as observed from distribution to distribution. It's going to be pretty messy, right? So if you have one link coming in, lots of possibilities in the next round. But broadly speaking, there's this kind of linear thing. It's very rough, and as we saw for the first mover advantage stuff, it is always going to be rough, even in that sort of very simplified model. So this matches up pretty well with a linear growth story, which is the simple version of Simon. Okay, so that's the nutshell. Simon's model actually seems to do pretty well. It's kind of surprising. There's the sense that Mandelbrot's optimality argument is just for free kind of there as well, right? But this is there's an optimality built into these things. So, right, that's what I'm trying to say there. You kind of get it. He's got a rough argument, it doesn't work out. But the way these things skewed, and that was what Zip was trying to say, that this is the principle of least effort, blah, blah, blah. But there's a mechanistic growing model that does a beautiful job for us, and that's where we should go. Okay, so, right, I'm sorry about that. You can, I guess it's the work. Okay, all right, thank you. Yes. Okay, team. So I'm going to talk more about these fundamental things. I'm going to show you a little bit of StatMech, which will be fun. Some more toy model things, magnets and percolation. These are good things to just touch on if you've never seen them before. Physicists are usually quite used to them, but they will also, so they give us the good things to play around with, and then we'll get to some more stuff later on with contagion, how things spread, right? So it's going to be deeply connected to how things spread, especially on networks. So you'll see how that comes about. Spreading is a big deal. We're worried about it all the time, quite reasonably. So we'll get to that. I just have this here. I don't know if anyone, I just brought it up, but if anyone, I'll just mention this. It's something I talked to, who was it, in office hours. Anyway, so this is a tricky thing that happens in assignment 5. You're going to get to this point from the optimization, right, from the Lagrange multipliers. You get to this thing. You have to take some care to get there, but once you're at that point, then you have to do some shenanigans basically to get to introduce, is it written down, our constraint, which is, right, so we have to somehow inject this constraint. This is usually how these things go, which is that the sum of the pi equals 1, right? So you want to deploy that at some point, and we'll use it in a couple of ways as you go through this. But so the sneaky thing is you step back from this and look at it for a while, right? So we've got this mass. It looks good. There's a power law decay here. There's some exponent. We're not really worried exactly what h and g and c are. We just need to know what that number is. And then we've got this prefactor out the front. So this is definitely, some monks died to do this, right? So there's just some sneakiness. You could battle around for a while. You look at these two expressions that we've had for h and c, for the information and for the cost. They're pretty similar looking in basic shape. Of course, this is the difference here. And now you have a connection between pi is proportional to some power of j plus a. Right, and j is just an integer. So this is something we can mess around with. If we take the expression we have for pj and just replace it here, right? So we're just going to replace it here. We're going to get something that looks like this. So we're going to sort of transmute h into c. That's what this is saying here. We're going to fashion h into c and then kind of clean it up. Right? So it's a little bit funny. You just sort of have to grit your teeth. You're going to replace that piece of I with all of this blob, but not this one, right? Because you're just trying to change it into something that looks partly like this. And as you go through, you'll see that some things have to balance out and be 0. And in fact, what you'll see is that this expression here is equal to 0. So this is really e to the 0, which is a 1. So then you're left with so that all just disappears in a sense, and then we end up with this. And then you again use your normalization that the sum of the probabilities has to be 1. Okay. Just going to put that there. We have office hours. Of course, after this we can talk more. Right. So